I wasn't the kind of person who believed in miracles. I believed in bills, in medical charts, in numbers that didn't lie when the bank called me twice a day. I worked as a crisis coordinator for a local nonprofit in Minneapolis. Ironic, really. I helped families find financial aid and emergency shelter, but I couldn't save my own brother. My younger brother, Jonah, was 24 and had been diagnosed with a rare degenerative bone disorder. He'd been in and out of hospitals since spring, each stay more expensive than the last. My insurance? Useless. Medicaid? Wait list. The best specialists? Cash up front. That kind of cash I didn't have. By the end of September, I was $82,000 in medical debt. I was 2 months behind on rent, and I was watching the only person I had left slowly waste away in a beige hospital bed under fluorescent lights that never turned off. That's when Silas Reed showed up. He didn't walk into my life. He arrived like a verdict, tall, cold. Wealth clung to his suit like dust. You didn't see the money. You felt it in the silence after he spoke. He found me in the hospital cafeteria, sitting with a warm soda and a packet of crackers I'd stolen from Jonah's tray. He didn't ask if he could sit. He simply did. "You're Mara Keene," he said. Not a question. "I am," I replied, too tired to ask who he was or how he knew that. He placed a thin leather folder on the table and opened it with the precision of a man who'd made a career out of contracts. Inside, legal documents, medical summaries, and one photograph. A man, early 30s, military haircut, lying in a hospital bed, tubes in his arms, eyes closed, still. I looked up. My silence must have read as sympathy, because he continued. "He's been comatose for 6 months. Car accident. Very tragic. And also very inconvenient." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" Silas leaned in. "There's a clause in my estate trust. For Evan to retain control of his inheritance and mine, frankly, he must be married. Legally. On paper, before the end of this year." I stared at him. "What does that have to do with me?" "I've done my homework. You're smart, educated, and in a desperate situation. No family except your brother. No assets. No leverage. And no time." My hands tightened around the soda can. "You're out of your mind." He didn't flinch. "I'm offering you a deal. Marry Evan. Move into the Reed estate. Appear at 2 charity events a month. Play the grieving wife of a war hero. In return, I cover all of Jonah's medical expenses, every cent, and set aside a trust fund for his future care. No strings, no intimacy, a paper marriage." I wanted to stand. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pour the soda in his lap and walk away. But my phone buzzed on the table, Jonah's nurse texting me. His platelet levels had dropped again. They needed approval for a new round of injections. Experimental, not covered. Silas looked at the phone, then at me. "You don't have time for pride, Ms. Keene. You have your brother. I have my son. Let's not pretend either of us has better options." I didn't sleep that night. I walked the hospital parking lot in my old sneakers until the moon was gone and the sky turned pale with snow. And then I went to the front desk and asked for a notary. They called it a ceremony. There was no aisle, no music, no guests. Just the rustle of legal pages, the ticking of a wall clock, and the slow, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor beside a man who hadn't spoken a word in half a year. Evan Reed, my legal husband. He lay there with a feeding tube taped to his mouth, an IV drip slow dancing beside him. His hair had been freshly cut, military short, precise. Someone had even shaved his face that morning. There was a sharp, sterile scent in the air, like rubbing alcohol and something floral fake, cheap, and trying too hard. I wore a cream blouse I'd pulled from the discount rack and slacks that didn't quite fit. No veil, no ring, only the pen in my hand, hovering over the dotted line like it might bite me. "Go ahead," said the notary, a kind woman in her 60s. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. Another family doing what they must. Silas stood to the side, perfectly still, like a lawyer watching his client sign away their last good days. His hands folded behind his back, no warmth in his expression, just certainty. I looked down at the signature line again. Mara Keene Reed. It didn't even sound real. I had never dated a military man. I didn't watch war movies. I didn't understand the rank system. And yet here I was, marrying a Bronze Star veteran I had never spoken to. A man whose entire life had been built around discipline, service, danger, and who now resembled a wax figure more than a person. I signed. I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt everything, all at once, guilt, shame, numb relief, like swallowing glass and pretending it was medicine. "Congratulations," the notary said gently. "You're now legally married under the state of Minnesota." I nodded, as if that meant something, as if it had weight. Silas stepped forward, retrieving the signed copy like it was the missing piece to a puzzle only he understood. "We'll file this immediately. You can move into the estate this week. We'll arrange a press statement, nothing invasive, just a note confirming your quiet ceremony." "I don't want any attention," I muttered. "You'll get some. He's a decorated soldier," Silas said. "But we'll manage it. You'll be protected." Protected? It was almost funny. I wasn't protected. I was purchased, wrapped in legality and sold into silence. After they left, I stayed. I sat beside Evan's bed, staring at his face. He looked younger than I expected, maybe 33. His jaw was strong, but his lips had a softness to them. His chest rose and fell in mechanical rhythm, his lungs doing their job without asking his permission. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I don't know what you'd say about any of this, or if you'd be okay with it. But I didn't do it for money. I did it for Jonah." His monitor beeped in steady intervals. No change. No reaction. I didn't expect one. I leaned forward, brushing a crease out of his bedsheet. "I hope, wherever you are, you're not angry." There were no vows, but I made one anyway, to myself, to the version of him I hadn't met. I wouldn't exploit this arrangement. I'd play the role they gave me, but I'd keep my dignity. And I'd make sure Jonah lived. That night, I slept in a cot outside Jonah's hospital room. I didn't tell him. I couldn't. Not yet. He'd ask too many questions, and I had no answers that would make sense. I dreamt of Evan's face, still, quiet, and the sound of a pen scratching paper over and over, as if I was signing my name for the rest of my life. I started reading to him out of obligation. The first time, it was just a way to fill the silence. I brought in a magazine Jonah liked, National Geographic, the one with the cover story on drought-resistant farming. I sat in the chair next to Evan's bed and read 2 full articles aloud, pausing only to sip lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup. He didn't stir. Not even a blink under those closed eyelids. But I kept coming back. Every day after work, after my brother's treatments, After I checked the mail and found more unpaid bills, I returned to that sterile room at the rehab center and sat beside a man who had no idea I existed, yet whose name I now shared legally. Sometimes I read the news, though I learned quickly to skip the political chaos. Once, I read a recipe for lemon risotto and pretended he cared. Another time, I found one of Evan's old field journals tucked in a drawer. It had faded ink sketches of terrain Afghanistan, maybe? Sparse notes, coordinates. One entry simply read, 23 children, 1 soccer ball. I cried in the parking lot that night. There was something about the quiet that made it worse. In that room, time didn't move the way it did outside. It stalled, hung in the air like the scent of antiseptic and overused linens. No visitors ever came. No friends. No mother. No sister. Just the occasional check-in from a nurse who always kept her eyes low when she saw me. Maybe they all thought I was doing it for money. Maybe they were right. But the more I read, the more I spoke into the silence, the more I started talking about myself instead of what was on the page. I told Evan about Jonah, about how we used to ride our bikes through cornfields until sunset, about how Jonah wanted to be a science teacher but now couldn't walk without help, about how scared I was that this whole marriage charade wouldn't be enough to save him. He didn't answer, obviously, but weirdly, talking to him helped. He became like a mirror I could speak into, a way to say the things I couldn't say to anyone else. No interruptions, no pity, just breathing, steady and automatic. And over time, I noticed things. Subtle, tiny things. How his hand was always clenched, like he was still bracing for something. How his jaw would twitch during certain words, maybe memory, maybe nothing. How sometimes, when I paused in the middle of a story, I felt like I owed it to him to finish it. Not because he needed it, but because I did. It was Lois who told me the first real thing about Evan. She wasn't a nurse, not exactly. More like a fixture, one of those women who had worked in too many homes for too many rich families, who'd seen too much and said too little. She was assigned to check on Evan 3 times a day, change his bedding, monitor his fluids, keep his body from forgetting it was still alive. She was the only person who called me Mrs. Reed, without sarcasm. One Thursday afternoon, I was folding one of Evan's blankets when she walked in holding a clipboard and a faint frown. "You're still here," she said, not unkindly. "I'm always here," I replied. She studied me for a second, then looked over at Evan. "You talk to him like you think he might answer." I gave a half smile. "Doesn't cost me anything to try." She hesitated, then walked to the other side of the bed and checked his IV line. "I knew him before this," she said quietly. "Back when he still had fire in his voice, before the accident." That caught my attention. I hadn't heard anyone use the word before with Evan. Everyone around him talked like he had always been like this, as if the man in the bed was the only version that ever existed. "What was he like?" I asked. She didn't look up. Too smart for his own good, too stubborn. He didn't like how his father ran things. Told him once, "You're not a businessman, you're a cleaner. You make messes disappear." I blinked. "He said that to Silas?" "He said worse," she said, almost smiling. The last few months before the crash, Evan was digging into something. Books, files, emails. He had me shred a dozen hard copies of contracts, but not before I saw the names on them. "What kind of contracts?" Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. "Private security deals, overseas. Stuff Silas didn't want showing up on paper. She lowered her voice. Evan found something he wasn't supposed to. Told me if anything happened to him, I should remember that it wasn't a coincidence. My stomach turned. You think it wasn't an accident? I said quietly. She didn't answer, just folded the sheet corner a little too tight. I didn't say that, she whispered. But I think you should be careful around Mr. Reed. Then she left. No explanation, no more words, just silence and Evan, breathing slow and steady beside me. But something had shifted. The man in the bed wasn't just a war hero or a name on a trust fund anymore. He was someone who'd stood up to his father, and someone who, possibly, had been punished for it. That night, after the hallways quieted and the nurses switched to night shift, I stayed behind. I knew the rules. No going through personal items, no rifling through drawers that weren't mine. But curiosity isn't always loud. Sometimes it just sits quietly behind your ribs until you finally move. There was a small cabinet in Evan's room, half filled with things that looked untouched for months. A duffel bag with worn-out handles. A stack of books, mostly military memoirs and field manuals. An old leather-bound notebook with water damage across the bottom, and under that, a manila folder. No label, no lock. I opened it. Inside were 6 printed emails, folded and refolded until the creases had become part of the paper. They weren't marked classified, but they didn't feel like the kind of thing meant for strangers. The subject line on the first one made my chest tighten. Barricade, civilian losses, urgent. It was a message chain between Evan and someone named Captain Rayner, dated 3 weeks before the accident. The tone wasn't casual, it was tense, clipped. I'm telling you, it doesn't add up. The casualty report was altered. We were told the site was cleared. It wasn't. We can't open this can of worms without backup. You're playing with fire, Evan. You know who signs these contracts. If I shut up now, I'll be complicit. There was more details about drone strikes, subcontractor bribes, blurred timelines, acronyms I didn't fully understand, but one line stuck with me like a nail in the floorboard. My father's name is on at least 3 of the approval chains, and they're retroactive. I folded the paper slowly. My hands were cold. This wasn't just family drama. It wasn't just a bad fall or a power play over inheritance. Something darker had been at play. Something Evan had gotten close to. Too close. I put the folder back where I found it. Closed the drawer. When I looked over at him, he was still the same. Unmoving. Quiet. Eyes shut. But in that moment, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt dangerous. The next day, I came earlier than usual. I had barely slept. My mind kept replaying that email, over and over, the tone, the urgency, the fact that Evan had called his father out by name. I didn't tell anyone about what I found. Not yet. I needed time. I needed distance. I needed something I couldn't name. Instead, I brought the folder with me. Just one page, copied and folded into the back of my novel like a secret note passed in school. I sat beside Evan like always. Same chair, same cracked cushion, same flickering light in the corner. And I read. I didn't start with a poem or a news article. I opened to a bookmarked section of the report, the one about the drone strike outside Kandahar, and began reading aloud. My voice was steady, but I could feel my hands sweating. The civilian housing block had not been cleared as previously stated. 12 confirmed casualties, including 7 children. Strike was approved through chain Bravo 6, signed retroactively by... That's when it happened. The faintest twitch. His right index finger, just a jerk, like a hiccup in the air. I froze mid-sentence. I stared at his hand, waiting, watching, hoping I imagined it, hoping I didn't. Nothing. Maybe it was a nerve spasm, a reflex, a phantom signal with no meaning. He hadn't moved in months, not once. I leaned in. Evan? Nothing. But my heart was racing now. I reread the same sentence, slower this time, watching his face, his hands, the rhythm of his breath. Nothing changed. Still, I couldn't shake it. That movement, it felt intentional, not random, not meaningless, like someone reaching for the surface, just briefly. I didn't mention it to the nurses. What would I say? That I read something about corruption and war crimes and the man in the coma responded like a lie detector? No one would believe me. Maybe I didn't believe myself. But that night, when I got back to my apartment, barely a home, just peeling paint and overdue heating, I wrote it down in a notebook I kept for Jonah's medical notes. November 14th. Evan moved, slight twitch in right index finger, while reading barricade email, one-time occurrence, unconfirmed. I closed the notebook, stared at the ceiling, and whispered into the dark. If you heard me, if you're in there, come back. I told myself it wasn't real. People twitch all the time in comas. I Googled it. Reflexes, nerve misfires, nothing meaningful, but I still showed up early the next day. Earlier than usual, before shift change, before the hallways filled with food carts and nurse chatter. Evan looked the same pace, but something in me had shifted. I brought the same paper, sat down, cleared my throat. November 12th drone strike approved by Bravo 6 civilian loss confirmed it. Stop! It was almost too soft to hear. A rasp. Barely more than breath. I froze. His lips hadn't moved. Or had they? My body flooded with adrenaline so fast it made me lightheaded. I leaned forward. Evan? His head didn't move, but his throat twitched, his jaw clenched. Then, in a voice like dry leaves on pavement, "Don't read that again." I dropped the page. It fluttered to the floor like it had burned me. "Can you hear me?" I asked. His eyes flickered. Just once. A flutter beneath the lids, like something behind them wanted out. "Evan, if you can understand me, move your finger." Nothing. I stood up, pacing in a tight circle. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I wasn't trained for this. I wasn't his wife. I was barely even pretending to be. I hit the nurse call button, then stopped. No, not yet. I crouched beside him. "That report barricade. You reacted to it yesterday. You said not to read it again. Why?" His lips parted slightly. A whisper followed. "Rayner's dead." I stared. The name was in the email. The captain. The man who warned him not to dig too deep. "You remember?" I asked, almost afraid of the answer. Another breath. Then, "I never forgot." I sat down hard. My knees gave out. I felt like the room had shifted on its axis. He hadn't just woken up. He hadn't just remembered. He'd been listening. For how long? I couldn't speak. I just stared. And for the first time, he opened his eyes. Not fully. Just enough for me to see the color. Steel gray. Alert. and full of something I didn't expect. Recognition. Not of me exactly, but of the sound of my voice. "You've been hearing me?" I whispered. His eyelids drooped again, the effort clearly draining him. But he managed one more word before sleep dragged him under. "Yes." I sat there in silence for a long time after that. Not because I was afraid, because I realized that for weeks I'd been pouring my fears, my secrets, my guilt into someone I thought couldn't hear me. But he had. And now, everything was about to change. I didn't tell the nurses what Evan said. Not yet. Maybe I was afraid they'd dismiss it. Call it a hallucination. A side effect of sleep deprivation on my part. Or maybe, selfishly, I wanted to hold on to the moment for myself a little longer. I kept coming, like always. Same chair. Same hour. But something was different now. I no longer read just to fill the silence. I spoke with purpose. I asked him questions. I gave space between sentences. I let him hear me, not just as a background hum, but as a person. And sometimes I thought he responded. A flicker of the eyelids, a tighter grip in his hand, the kind of signals you couldn't document, but you felt anyway. I used to think I was pretending, playing a role written by a rich man with too much power and no sense of consequence. But I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't just the woman who signed a paper. I was the voice he held on to in the dark. And for the first time since all this began, I didn't feel like I was trapped. I felt like I had chosen to stay. He showed up 3 days after Evan first spoke. I knew it was only a matter of time. But somehow, I'd hoped we had more of it. Silas Reed walked into the rehab center like he owned not just the building, but the people in it. His coat barely dusted the floor. His shoes didn't squeak. He didn't acknowledge me when he passed in the hallway. He never did, unless I was useful. "Where is he?" he asked the attending nurse. "Room 214, she said. No hesitation. I stood in the corner of the hallway, watching through the sliver of the door as Silas entered Evan's room. I thought maybe he'd cry. He didn't. Instead, just above a whisper, "You're going to listen, and you're going to let me handle this." Evan didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. Since that first whisper, he hadn't spoken again. Not a word. Not even a flicker of the eyes. I wasn't sure if it was exhaustion or choice. When I walked in a few minutes later, Silas had already straightened his jacket and adjusted his tie like he was preparing for a courtroom, not a hospital. He turned to me and smiled, a politician's smile. "Good news travels fast. Word's gotten out that Evan opened his eyes." I said nothing. He handed me a folder. "What's this?" "A press release. Light, tasteful. Just a few lines for the veteran community and the Family Trust Board. We'll announce that Evan regained limited consciousness and is under observation. You'll be quoted briefly as his wife. Something simple, loving, nothing dramatic. You don't need to write anything. It's already done." He stepped closer. "You'll read it tomorrow at a small media gathering outside the estate. No questions allowed, just presence." I looked down at the page. My name was there. Mara Keene Reed, devoted wife. She never left his side. It read. Her voice was the first sound he recognized upon waking. He made it sound romantic. He made it sound like love. I swallowed hard. He hasn't really woken up." Silas narrowed his eyes. "He opened his eyes, didn't he?" "Yes, but..." Then the story writes itself. He paused. And you, my dear, are finally earning your keep. I wanted to tear the folder in half, but I didn't. I couldn't. Not when Jonah still needed treatment. Not when the payments for his medication still came in the name of a family I now legally belonged to. So I nodded. That night, I sat beside Evan like always. I didn't read. I just talked. He's spinning a lie, I said. You're the hero. I'm the loyal wife. He's the father who just wants his son back. I laughed once. A sharp, bitter sound. I'm tired of pretending. Then something I didn't expect happened. Evan's hand moved, slow, barely there, but it reached just enough to brush my fingers resting on the bed. I froze. He wasn't gone. He wasn't broken. He was still in there, listening, holding on, and maybe, just maybe, waiting for the right moment to wake up fully and destroy the version of the story his father was so desperate to keep alive. He opened his eyes again the next morning, fully this time. I had just finished brushing my teeth in the hallway bathroom when I came back and found him staring at the ceiling. No confusion, no panic, just clarity, like he had simply stepped out of a long meeting and was waiting for the rest of us to catch up. Morning, I said carefully. His eyes moved toward me, slow but sure. Then he spoke, hoarse, deliberate. I know your voice. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't dramatic, it was honest. I pulled the chair close, sat down. You've been listening, I said. He nodded, barely. For how long? He blinked once. Since before the wedding. That hit like a punch to the chest. All of it? I whispered. Another nod. I didn't know whether to be horrified or relieved. I had spilled my soul to him in that room. Every fear, every anger, every secret. I thought you were gone. I was, he said. But your voice pulled me back. We sat in silence for a while. Not awkward, just weighty. Then he said it, the thing that changed everything. My father thinks he owns you. He doesn't. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He's already crafted a version of this, I said. The press release, the story us. He shifted slightly in bed, winced but didn't complain. Let him build his house of lies. You want to stay in the role? Until I know what he buried. I nodded. You're not the only one who wants answers. He turned his head toward me, slow but focused. Then we play along. That's when I realized this wasn't just survival anymore. It was strategy. Two strangers, bound by a paper marriage, sitting in a hospital room surrounded by cameras and caretakers and carefully managed narratives. And yet, in that quiet, we forged something real. Not love. Not yet. But something stronger than performance. Trust. I reached for his hand, not as a wife, not as a caregiver, but as an equal. He let me take it. Just before the nurse came in with the chart, he whispered, "They won't see it coming." Once Harlan and I made our silent pact, I started watching everything differently, especially Silas. He never raised his voice, never made a threat out loud. But things moved when he wanted them to. Doctors changed rotation schedules without explanation. Nurses avoided eye contact. Paperwork disappeared from the admin desk like it had never existed. He didn't walk with authority. He walked like a man who knew where every security camera pointed and how to step just outside their frame. One afternoon, I saw him speaking with the chief neurologist outside Harlan's room. It looked casual, just small talk. But 2 days later, that neurologist was reassigned to another hospital. The replacement? A physician whose last name I remembered from a foundation gala brochure Silas had donated to. He never touched anything directly. But nothing happened without his fingerprint on it, hidden, buried, but undeniable. He controlled the story, the care, the estate, even me. But what he didn't know was that I'd stopped being his puppet the moment Harlan squeezed my hand. And I was starting to see the strings. It wasn't romantic. There was no candlelit moment, no soft confession under trembling breaths. There was just a hospital room, the low hum of a heart monitor, and 2 people who had learned how the world worked the hard way. I was flipping through discharge protocols for Jonah when Harlan finally said it. "I don't believe in love." I looked up from the clipboard. "Is that your way of saying thanks for marrying you?" He almost smiled. Not quite. His face was still pale, his voice still dry from sedation. But the edge in him was back. That sharp, controlled fire I had only heard hints of before. "I'm saying," he continued, "you don't owe me anything. This marriage, it wasn't love. It was survival." I nodded. For both of us. He watched me closely. "So let's make it official. Not the marriage, the deal. I help you protect your brother. You help me finish what I started before the accident." "What exactly are we finishing?" He looked toward the window. Snow was falling. Quiet, steady, indifferent. "I was about to expose a string of illegal defense contracts tied to my father's shell companies. Civilian casualties, hidden trials, bribes. He covered it up, but I had proof. I already knew parts of it, the emails, the whispers from Lois, but hearing it from him full voice, full clarity, made it real. "And the accident?" I asked. "I was going to a private meeting. Never made it. They said it was rain, brakes, fatigue." He turned to me. "I don't believe in coincidences either." The silence stretched. Then I said it. "What do you need from me?" He didn't flinch. "Your access. Silas trusts you. He lets you into the estate, the office, the family events. You hear things I can't. And in return, you get control," he said. "When this ends, I walk away from the Reed fortune. You keep whatever rights the trust allows. For Jonah, for yourself." I stared at him. This wasn't a man asking for help. This was a soldier building a counter-offensive with the only ally he had left. I thought about everything I'd done to survive. The marriage, the silence, the humiliation of pretending to be in love with someone I barely knew. This, at least, was honest. I held out my hand. "No promises," I said. "But I'm in." His fingers wrapped around mine, firm, stronger than before. And that was it. No kisses, no ceremony. Just 2 people trapped in a story someone else wrote, finally picking up a pen of their own. The first performance was at a charity gala hosted at the Reed estate. It was one of those events where everyone wore expensive smiles and drank things they couldn't pronounce. War widows, defense contractors, senators in tuxedos, the whole collection of power dressed in grief and glitter. Silas had insisted we attend. "Reed legacy must be visible," he said. "The public wants to see their hero healing with his wife at his side." So we went. I wore a navy blue dress Silas's assistant had picked for me, paired with a necklace I couldn't afford even in dreams. Harlan wore a tailored suit, his first time out of a hospital gown in months. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane, his movements careful but deliberate. To anyone watching, we were the image of resilience. But they didn't see the quick glances, the coded silences. The plan had been simple. During the second course, I'd pick a fight. Something small, loud enough for attention, but not scandalous. The goal was to distract Silas and his inner circle long enough for Harlan to slip away to his father's locked office upstairs, an office I had once helped redecorate during our honeymoon phase. So I chose my moment. "You could at least try to act like you care," I snapped, loud enough for the nearby table to pause their wine. Harlan looked at me blankly. "This again? You think walking in here with a cane makes you a martyr? I'm the one who stayed." His jaw tightened. "Then leave." I stood, slammed my napkin down. A collective gasp rippled through the table. Silas, 2 tables away, looked up just as I stormed off toward the terrace. Eyes followed me. No one noticed Harlan slip out the side door 5 minutes later. I waited 10 minutes in the cold before circling around the house to the west side entrance. The kitchen staff was busy with dessert prep. I moved fast. Upstairs, the study door was already cracked open. Harlan stood at the desk, typing slowly. His hands were shaking, more from pain than nerves, but he was in. "Password?" I whispered. "Your birthday," he muttered, almost smiling. He's not subtle. Inside, folders digital and physical were stacked like a museum of buried intentions. Financial records, subcontractor ledgers, flight logs for private security advisors that never made it into official military reports. He copied everything he could onto an encrypted drive we'd prepared the day before. 5 more minutes, he said. Then, footsteps. I moved to the hallway, heart pounding. Silas's voice. "Harlan?" I raised my voice. "There you are!" Harlan stepped out, closing the study door behind him. I grabbed his arm. "You left me on the patio with 10 senators and half a bottle of Chardonnay. What do you think people are saying?" He didn't miss a beat. "That I'm tired of pretending." "Then pretend harder." We descended the stairs in silence, tension radiating like static. From across the room, Silas watched us, pleased, smug. He thought the marriage was cracking. He had no idea we were just getting started. I watched her from the top of the stairs. She didn't know I was there. That's what made it real. Silas had pulled her aside near the end of the gala. They stood by the fireplace, him holding a check, her standing like she was made of stone. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I knew the rhythm of my father's persuasion. The calm condescension, the veiled threat wrapped in a compliment. He handed her the check. She looked at it. Just a glance. Then tore it in half, clean, slow, deliberate. She didn't yell, didn't make a scene. She just dropped the pieces on the floor, turned, and walked away. My father stood still for a moment, stunned in a way I hadn't seen in years. And that's when I knew. Mara wasn't here for the payout. She never had been. She was choosing to stay for reasons far beyond survival. I turned back toward the study, clutching the flash drive in my coat pocket. This wasn't just my war anymore. It was ours. You think war breaks you all at once, but it doesn't. It erodes you, line by line, like ink soaking into paper, like water wearing through stone. That's what I told Mara the night we opened the files. We were sitting on the floor of the study in the guest house, cross-legged like kids. The flash drive was plugged in. The screen was full of numbers, contracts, acronyms that made most people's eyes glaze over. Not mine. Not anymore. I recognized the names, the budget codes, the deployment zones. I knew them because I'd been there before the coma, before the silence, before the guilt. I was 28 when they assigned me to a recon unit outside Kandahar. I said quietly. We were told it was counter-intel. Standard patrols. Keep the roads clear. Monitor tribal movement. I paused, fingers tightening around the mug in my hand. But it wasn't. It was barricade. Mara looked at me, said nothing, just listened. There was a village, I continued. Not on the maps, not formally recognized, but we knew they were there, farmers mostly. No combatants, no flags, no threats. I stared at the screen, but I wasn't seeing it anymore. I watched a drone hit it, middle of the afternoon, no warning. It came down like thunder, and when the dust cleared, it was gone. All of it. A crater and screams. Mara's voice was soft. Why? The files said there was a weapons cache, satellite heat signature, but the intel came from a third-party contractor, not us. They never confirmed it. No eyes on the ground. Just assumption. I turned the laptop toward her, highlighted one name, Lambrick Solutions, LLC Primary. Signatory, S. Reed. Silas, she whispered. I nodded. He wasn't just funding the program, he was shaping it. I pulled out the field journal I kept hidden even now, flipped to a page where I'd written the names of the kids, first names only. A list I made the night after the strike. I wrote them down to remember, so someone would. 7 of them, I said. One of them was kicking a ball when the drone came. Mara's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. She didn't need to. The silence between us was grief enough. I reported it, I said. To command, to oversight. I filed it 3 times, got stonewalled twice, then reassigned, then followed. She leaned in. Followed? I nodded. Emails traced, calls flagged. My CO told me, off the record, you're making enemies with the wrong kind of friends. That's when I started saving copies of everything. And the accident? I hesitated. There was no rain that day. The brakes weren't worn, and I know how to drive a goddamn car. For the first time, my voice cracked, just slightly. I don't know if Silas gave the order. I don't even know if it was him directly, but I know this. The closer I got to the truth, the more silence followed me. Mara closed the laptop. You were going to testify, she said. I was. And now? I looked at her. Now we testify together. We weren't supposed to have anything in common. That was the deal, wasn't it? He was the decorated soldier with shadows behind his eyes. I was the girl who signed a contract out of desperation. But sometimes life hides echoes in the places you least expect. And one night, while combing through a spreadsheet of old Department of Defense event roster, Civic Shelter Conference, Austin, 2017. I had highlighted it in passing. A guest list, buried inside a logistics folder. Nothing suspicious at first. But then Harlan said, Wait, that one, I was there? I looked at him. What were you doing at a shelter conference? He tilted his head. I was stationed in San Antonio that year. They needed bodies to cover some infrastructure panel. Thought I'd get out of it, but I didn't. I stared at the screen, scrolling through the attendee list. There it was. Mara Keene, University of Minnesota, Urban Crisis Research Fellow. I blinked. Oh my God, I presented there. He raised an eyebrow. Seriously? I had just gotten the grant for a mobile shelter prototype. I stood in this drafty auditorium with a folding projector and begged a room full of mid-level officials to care about displaced families. I laughed once, half amused, half embarrassed. I think 6 people clapped. Harlan was quiet for a second. Then he said, "You were wearing a navy dress, black boots. You had a slight stutter when you said socioeconomic." I froze. You remember? He looked a little surprised at himself. I remember thinking, you sounded like someone who actually gave a damn. Not many people in that room did. For a moment, I forgot the folders. The war, the lies, the hospital. There we were, 2 people in the same place, years before our lives collided for real. And one of us remembered. I don't know why that hit so hard, I whispered. But it does. Harlan leaned back in the chair, rubbing his temples. Maybe because, for once, it's something that wasn't orchestrated, not Silas, not marriage papers, not a plan. Just a memory, a true one. I sat there, still processing it, that even back then, when I thought I was invisible in that auditorium, someone saw me. You didn't come up after, I said. I almost did, he admitted. But I didn't think a woman with that much conviction would want to waste time on a guy in uniform holding a clipboard. I smiled. I would have said hi. He looked at me. Well, you just did. 5 years late. We didn't touch. We didn't make a declaration. But something shifted in that room. Not dramatic, not loud, just the quiet falling away of a wall neither of us had realized we were still holding up. He waited until Harlan was asleep, or at least appeared to be. Silas asked the staff to clear the east wing for a private conversation. I knew what that meant. When a man like him wants silence, it's never just about the acoustics. The room he chose was part study, part museum. Wood-paneled walls, old military medals in glass cases, a fireplace with no warmth. The kind of place where decisions get made and history gets rewritten. I sat across from him. No lawyers, no assistants, just us. He placed a black envelope on the table between us. I didn't reach for it. "Open it," he said. I didn't move. He sighed, picked it up himself and slid the contents out, a check for $2 million and a signed dissolution agreement. Clean, legal, immediate. "You walk away," he said, voice calm. "No press, no complications. The marriage is quietly annulled. Your brother continues to receive the medical funding through a charitable foundation, not tied to the Reed name." "And what do you get?" I asked, finally speaking. He smiled like it amused him that I had to ask. "I get my son back. I get control of the story. No confusion, no mixed messaging, no unstable outsider whispering into his ear." He leaned forward. "You've played your role better than I expected. You were a solution, temporary. But now it's time for the adults to finish the work." I looked at the check. I'd never seen that many zeros in one place. It looked like fiction. And yet, it wasn't tempting. It was insulting. Not because of the money, but because he thought I could be bought now, after everything. Still, I said nothing. Silas hated silence more than argument. He thrived on control, but only when he could see the pieces move. "You understand what happens if you stay," he said. I nodded. "You won't win." Still, I said nothing. His jaw flexed. "This is your last safe exit, Mara." I stood up, didn't take the check, didn't tear it, didn't speak, just walked out. And as I closed the heavy oak door behind me, I realized something strange. I wasn't scared anymore, because I'd already made my choice. I'd been feeling off for days. At first, I blamed stress. The late nights, the constant lying, the hovering sense that at any moment Silas might destroy everything we were building. Then came the nausea, then the headaches, then the dizziness that hit me like a wave as I was brushing my teeth one morning. I sat on the cold tile floor for nearly 15 minutes before I could stand again. That afternoon, while Harlan was in physical therapy, I walked to the pharmacy 2 blocks from the estate, wore sunglasses, paid in cash. It sat in my coat pocket like a weight the whole way home. The instructions were simple. I didn't need them. I'd read them before, years ago. I took the test, then waited. 3 minutes can stretch like a lifetime when you already know what's coming but don't want to believe it. And there it was. 2 lines. Clear, definite, positive. I stared at the result, not blinking, not breathing. This wasn't part of the plan. There had been no intimacy, no love story, no candlelit moment. Only one night early on, before trust, before strategy, when loneliness had swallowed logic and we clung to each other like survivors on a sinking ship. I thought it had passed quietly. But now, this. A life, growing inside me. Not born from love, but maybe not born into fear either. I didn't tell Harlan right away, not because I was afraid of what he'd say, but because for the first time I wanted one moment, just one that belonged only to me. I thought saying no the first time was the hardest. I was wrong. Because the second time, I wasn't afraid. I was standing in Silas's private office, the place where he orchestrated empires behind closed doors. He handed me a new envelope, a bigger number, a colder tone. "No more warnings," he said. "You walk or you burn with him." I looked him in the eye. "No." He blinked, just once. Then something shifted in his face, something I hadn't seen before. Not control, not disappointment. Panic. "You think you've won," he said quietly, "but you don't even know what war you're in." He reached into the drawer behind his desk. I didn't need to see it. I heard the click. Metal. Loaded. Real. My heart punched the inside of my chest, but I didn't step back. "I've survived worse than you," I said. Then, a voice. "Put it down." Harlan. He was at the door, standing tall, no cane, breathing heavy, but steady. Silas turned, startled. "You shouldn't be here." "I should have been here a long time ago," Harlan said. Silas raised the gun slightly. Not toward me, toward his son. And that's when the front door slammed open. Boots, shouting. "FBI, drop the weapon!" Silas froze. Harlan stepped forward, between me and the barrel. The gun hit the floor with a hollow sound. Silas said nothing as they cuffed him. No speech, no rage, just the look of a man who finally realized the script was no longer his to write. And me? I didn't run, I didn't flinch. I stayed. Not because of duty. Not for Jonah. Not for Harlan. Because I finally knew what it meant to choose for myself. 3 years later, the land is quiet. Not silent. Just settled. Eve is chasing butterflies between the benches again. She's wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big and boots she refuses to lace. Her hair's in that messy half ponytail Harlan learned to do on YouTube when she refused to sit still for me. I'm sitting on the steps of the central shelter wing, sipping coffee that's gone cold, and watching her run. The community center behind me is finally finished solar roofs, reinforced weather walls, raised garden beds. The plaque on the front reads, "The Keene Reed Transitional Village for Veterans and Families." People still call it the compound like it's a bunker. But it's not. It's a beginning. We built it on land no one wanted. Land Silas used to own. After the trial, the trust was frozen. But with Harlan's testimony and the leak of Barricade's documents, the tide turned fast. Civil cases opened, settlements happened, and what was once dirty money became something cleaner, not perfect, but useful. We started small, 7 units, communal kitchen, on-site counseling. Now there are 23 families here, people rebuilding, people like us. Harlan runs logistics. I manage education grants. Jonah handles recreation programs on weekends. He's walking again slowly, but proudly. He never liked asking for help. Now he teaches others how to accept it. And Eve? She calls every vet here uncle or aunt, depending on who's holding snacks. Last month she found a cracked dog tag under the mulch and asked if it was treasure. I told her yes. I wasn't lying, because what we found here wasn't gold or glory or forgiveness. It was time. Time to heal, to grow, to try again without performance or pressure. Sometimes Harlan still wakes up sweating. Sometimes I still freeze when I hear a drawer slam. But most mornings, we eat oatmeal as the sun comes in sideways through the kitchen window. We argue over coffee strength. We kiss in passing, without ceremony. And we listen when Eve laughs. Because that sound, that clear, unfiltered joy is proof that the story didn't end in a hospital or a courtroom or with a check on a polished desk. It ended here, with boots in the dirt, with drawings taped to the fridge, with a man who learned to walk again, and a woman who learned how to stay, not out of obligation, but out of choice. This is our family. No ceremony, no press release, just us. And it's real. Every night, after Eve's fallen asleep, arms flung sideways like she's conquered the bed, we go back to the same ritual. I make tea. Harlan turns off the porch light. And I read. It started back at the rehab center, when no one thought he was listening, when I thought I was reading to a stranger just to keep from unraveling. Now, I still read. But the room is warm, the air still, and he's sitting beside me, not comatose, not silent, but awake, present, real. Tonight, it's an old book. Something I read in college. A quiet novel about broken people who found their way back to each other through letters and time and silence. I don't read aloud the way I used to, overpronouncing every line, trying to sound composed. Now I read how I feel. Slow, steady, unpolished. The kind of reading that invites breath between words. Harlan leans back on the worn couch. His hand rests over mine. "Do you ever miss the noise?" he asks softly. I know what he means. The noise of war, of ambition, of being needed by powerful men in powerful rooms. Sometimes, I admit, but it wasn't real. Not to me. He nods. I used to think silence was punishment, he says. And now? He smiles, not wide, but with the kind of peace that's earned, not gifted. Now it's a gift. I close the book halfway through the chapter. We don't need the ending tonight. Some stories don't ask to be finished in one sitting. I look at him. His scars are fading. His hair is longer. He still flinches when doors slam, still double-checks locks before bed. But he sleeps now, really sleeps. And sometimes, when he thinks I'm not listening, he sings to Eve off-key lullabies he makes up as he goes. If you told me 4 years ago that I'd be sitting here married, a mother, reading to a man I once thought of as a paycheck, I would have laughed, or cried, or both. But here's the truth. What kept me in that hospital room wasn't guilt. It wasn't money. It wasn't even the promise I made when I signed my name on a dotted line under the words, legal spouse. It was the sound of my own voice bouncing off the walls and being heard, really heard. And what brought Harlan back wasn't medicine. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't me. It was the freedom to choose. And that's what we gave each other. Not romance in the traditional sense. Not a love story carved in rose petals and vows. But freedom. The freedom to fall apart and rebuild. To speak or stay silent. To walk away or to stay. Fully, willingly, present. And somehow, in all that quiet, something lasting grew. Now, when I read aloud, it isn't to fill space. It's to hold space. And Harlan doesn't listen to remember. He listens to rest. To begin again, line by line. So I read, while the tea goes cold, while our daughter dreams down the hall, while the world outside spins in its own loud chaos. And here, in this house built from choice, not contract, I speak softly. And he stays.